This episode of the Powering Through podcast is brought to you by NCHS, National Cornerstone Healthcare Services, a subsidiary of NCHS Holdings. NCHS is a full-service healthcare organization which, through its affiliates, includes an accredited specialty pharmacy founded to serve people with hemophilia and other blood disorders and to optimize patient quality of life by providing personalized healthcare services in addition to pharmacy services. NCHS makes independence the goal for people living with chronic disorders. They believe the home or an alternate non-clinical setting is the best place to receive treatments, which is why they do much more than just fill prescriptions. Patients of NCHS can also expect medication therapy management, coordination of nursing services, and much more, including translation services for non-English speakers. Learn more about NCHS services and the team who provides them by visiting nchswecare.com. Once again, that's nchswecare.com.
Everybody needs an advocate.
Because I'm not there 24/7.
Families that have hemophilia mature faster.
I've been feeling a lot of anxiety lately.
I'm so tired of being strong.
To understand how far we've come helps you appreciate where we are now.
No is just no for this person. Somebody's gonna say yes sooner or later.
And it helps you understand that there are more steps to be taken in the future.
You're the first person I've met with a bleeding disorder.
Let's fight the disease and not the people who have it.
Hello and welcome to the Powering Through podcast, featuring panel conversations on obstacles, challenges, and what it takes to overcome, held for the benefit of the bleeding disorders community. The Powering Through podcast is sponsored by NCHS, produced by BloodStream Media, and I am your host, Heather Robb. You can subscribe to the Powering Through podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to have the most recent episode delivered directly to you. And visit poweringthrough.org to see videos, photos, and other podcast episodes from all of our Powering Through events. In this episode, we give a listen to our Powering Through event held during the Hemophilia of Indiana's annual meeting. Our community participants were Vanessa and Jason Flora, Heather Stephenson, a childhood friend of Ryan White, served as our guest participant, and the host of the Powering Through panel is Patrick James Lynch. We start our conversation with Vanessa and Jason, who have two sons with hemophilia. Vanessa, who also has hemophilia, talks about the long unaddressed history of bleeding disorders in her family and how she came to finally accept her diagnosis. Jason talks about adjusting to life as a hemo dad and the support he found within the local community. So let's take a listen to Hemophilia of Indiana's Powering Through, starting with Vanessa and Jason Flora.
Today is particularly fun, again, for me. We do these a fair amount. It's the first time we're going to have two people from the same family on the panel. So there's something unique that we have here in Indiana. We got a family represented in Powering Through today. Jason and Vanessa Flora, and then our third panelist, Heather Stephenson, who is the founder of Sam's Wish and has an incredible list of accomplishments that I will get to, but also is a childhood friend of Ryan White. What is it to be the sibling, the husband, the parent, the friend to the individual affected by the bleeding disorder? And then Vanessa herself is in fact someone who has mild hemophilia. And you have two sons that have severe hemophilia.
Two boys. Elias is 6 and Emmett is 2.5. When my mother was pregnant with myself, she got a phone call from an estranged aunt that said, hey, I heard that you're pregnant. By the way, there's a problem with the boys' blood in our family. I lost a lot of brothers when we were younger. Click kind of thing. And so she wasn't really sure what happened. I was born, I was a girl. She didn't worry about it. My brother was born. And when he came out, then he had the heel stick and it didn't stop bleeding. And then at that point, he was like airlifted to Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, and they figured out what was wrong with him. And we actually ended up finding out that my boys are probably the 5th or 6th generation, but it was always kind of this family secret.
You had a vague idea that there was something wrong with the blood, and it wasn't until that point where she kind of made that phone call that we began to establish what was going on.
There was nothing known until she got the phone call. So it was just uncles and her brother who had died, and they just didn't know why. When Tim was born, and his heel stick didn't stop bleeding, then...
Tim is your brother?
Yeah, that's my brother. When they finally said, okay, let's test it, because my mom was told something, and then they were able to figure it out fairly quickly. And I remember the first time I met him, he was at the ICU at Children's Hospital, and he was with all of these very sick babies, and here he was looking fairly normal. I remember I had to hold him in a pillow. Like, my parents wouldn't let me just hold him. I couldn't bruise him. I couldn't break him because he was breakable. The Children's Hospital HTC, like in Los Angeles, was a lot like the one that we have here. I mean, and they enveloped us, they surrounded us with services. We plugged right into the chapter in Southern California. So we started getting really involved as kids at a very young age.
As an outsider to the community, I'm talking to, I was 21 when I met Vanessa, she was 18. I'm hearing about hemophilia, it's a part of her life and how her brother has their hemophilia. And I also heard about her going to camp back at Big Bear in California, and how every year people would come to camp and the next year they might not be there because they got sick, they had the co-infection with HIV. As a new person first hearing about hemophilia, that was pretty strange and scary and freaky. So it's crazy how my perception has changed from day one as a complete outsider just hearing about it from my wife-to-be versus now I'm a hemophilia dad, my wife's a moderate hemophiliac.
You were a dancer for a long time and throughout college. And Jason, what was it like for you in college when you were watching her do something she loved but kind of sacrificing a little bit of her body to do it?
Seeing her get a bleed, having to sit out, that was the hardest. It was very hard for her. And as her boyfriend or husband, you want to be there and say, gee, I'm sorry, I'm here for you, what can I do? Now that I have two boys, we try not to limit them for the same reason. I think perhaps in response to what I saw from Vanessa when she couldn't dance. She had to miss a nutcracker. She had to miss something because of a bleed. So I see my 6-year-old now, my 2-year-old who are both severe, they're both on prophylactic. We try not to limit them. We want them to have the normal kid experience and not have to be the kid sitting on the playground where everybody else is getting to do what they want to do.
We also heard from Heather Stephenson, a close childhood friend of Ryan White. For those of you who don't know, Ryan was just 13 years old when he contracted AIDS from contaminated factor in 1984. After befriending Heather, Ryan also became close to her brother Sam, who became the inspiration for Sam's Wish, a nonprofit Heather started in 2015 that helps people with disabilities live happier and healthier lives. We'll jump back in to hear from Heather right after this quick word from our sponsor.
You've heard from NCHS about the services they provide to their patients. Now they'd like you to meet one of those patients. Joe. When Joe first moved to St. Louis, it was a bit of a shock. It's a big city, he was looking for a job. He didn't have much time to try to figure out his new insurance policy or figure out how he'd continue to receive his factor. Joe made a call to an NCHS rep he met at a conference, Kara, and Kara helped Joe get his coverage and his care in order. She ordered Joe's factor and made sure it got to him on the same day every month. She'd call to make sure everything arrived in order and check in on him periodically to make sure that he was keeping up with his care. Kara works for NCHS, the specialty pharmacy and healthcare organization, and this is what she does. She takes some of the hassle out of everyday life with a bleeding disorder. So Joe was able to focus on self-care without having to spend hours on the phone with doctors, pharmacies, or insurers. His factor and supplies showed up on time every month in the right quantities, and if there was ever a problem, he could call Kara. She just made life easier. NCHS. We care for life. Okay, Heather, I got to bring you into this as well now. I can't make it just about the Flora family. What is Sam's wish?
Sure. My little brother, Sam, is the youngest of 8 kids. And when I was in college, Sam wanted to do Special Olympics, and there wasn't a program in our county, so I decided to start one. We went from one athlete, being Sam, to nearly 1,000 in about 20 years. So I ran Special Olympics Hamilton County for 20 years as a volunteer. I was addicted. I loved it. I loved everything about it. In July of last summer, I decided I'm going to start a not-for-profit and I need to do more. And so Sam's Wish is a not-for-profit organization that our mission is to help people in their time of need and help people with disabilities live happier and healthier lives.
I don't know Sam, so in terms of like how is he able to articulate his journey through?
He is the president. He is the one that I give all the credit to.
The reason specifically that you're here is because you are a childhood friend of someone that means a tremendous amount to the hemophilia community at large, but most especially probably here in Indiana, you were one of Ryan White's closest friends.
I was. I was a freshman in high school. I was in science class, and the science teacher, a couple hours before Ryan, or I guess a period before Ryan were to come, she asked me if Ryan could sit at my table, and I was like, well, sure. You know, several months before, Hamilton Heights was educated on what HIV and AIDS was and who Ryan was, and we saw him on the news, and It was, you know, national news. Every night you turn it on, you saw this. It changed my life forever the day he sat at that table. I don't know what it was, but Ryan and I connected so quickly. I think he needed me as much as I needed him. So after science class, they immediately changed our schedule, so we were in most of the classes together because they saw that bond, and they wanted Ryan's experience at Hamilton Heights to be the best, and they wanted him to have a friend. I just was happy to have somebody that wanted to be my friend as much as he did.
Where was your need as a kid in high school?
I think I was just always that person that needed to feel wanted, like needed to feel like they were helping someone. And it wasn't that I even felt that I was helping Ryan, but just the way everybody reacted to our friendship, I knew it was going to be something good.
So I'm curious to know, Vanessa, for you, since we're now kind of talking about the 80s and the connection that the community has, and again, it's something that here in Indiana, in large part because of Ryan, I feel is all the more a consideration. Your aunt, was there any evolution in her relationship to hemophilia, bleeding disorders, your family, once your brother was diagnosed, then you were diagnosed, or how did that proceed?
I know like my mother and her mother's relationship started to get a little bit stronger. So, you know, when my grandmother was able to kind of accept, all right, like this is not the family curse, and let me see how Tim is doing so well, you know, and he's actually living past toddlerhood, and this big family secret kind of came out, and I think everybody became a lot more accepting of it. The one thing that I would notice on my mom for the most hand was for her kind of going from that period of guilt, which any mom with a hemophiliac child goes through. It's like, well, I gave this to you, so there's this guilt, you know, and just kind of watching her evolve through that from like that guilt portion to acceptance, but also like having those moments kind of going back and forth of like guilt. And I still have that today myself, you know, like with my own kids, where that we may be having a very challenging time, and it's like all I do is I blame myself for it. And then Jason's really good in saying, it's not your fault, this is just what the deck we've been handed. Stop blaming yourself, you know, get over it, buck up, and let's keep going. I've learned that from her, you know, that I don't have to like walk around with this sense of guilt because I'm the one who caused this in my child.
Well, speaking of like having children and knowing that that potentiality was there, Jason, was that ever a consideration for you when you and Vanessa became more serious?
Yeah, you know, we knew that there's a 50% chance of we'd have a boy who'd have hemophilia, so a 25% chance overall, and that I think at first was daunting. But then I also looked around and at her brother. I looked at Tim. I mean, he runs triathlons. You know, I can't run a triathlon. Right. I mean, we can do this. We can have kids, and you know, whatever hand we're dealt, we can go for it, and we'll be fine. And even after having had our first child, Elias, who's now 6, you know, we thought before we go for number 2, or do we want to have 2 kids with hemophilia? You know, and that conversation was a lot shorter. Yeah. You know, the first one and getting through, I think just having your first child by itself is a shock, of course, but add in the hemophilia element, and when we saw, hey, we can do this. He's got a port, we scrub him down, stick him. It's like brushing your teeth. It takes a little longer, but once we realized we had done this once, we could do it again. Yeah. So yeah, we learned it is manageable, and we learned that from other people in the community and people within our own family.
And I've spoken to a number of people who have adopted a child with hemophilia after having their own child and realizing, oh, this is manageable, and now I kind of know this rhyme and rhythm. But the ability to make a difference in someone's life because you realize, well, I can handle it, so you can bring someone else into the fold that may have the same thing.
Absolutely.
I'm curious to know, did Ryan speak much about having hemophilia with you? Because obviously that wasn't the most paramount of his medical concerns when you two knew each other.
He didn't. Brian didn't speak much about anything that he had when we were friends, but he knew I knew because the world knew. He was always so positive because his life outside of, you know, being with his friends was sometimes so negative.
Right. So when he was with his friends, it was just indulging in the positivity of those
everything was about what can we do to get in trouble, you know.
Yeah. What did you do to get in trouble? Give us some of the fun stuff. Give us the good stuff that's like not in the books or in a news story. Like what were the topics? What were the regular things that would come up?
One of Ryan's favorite things was cruising. You would meet at Port Cicero and you would drive your car up 19 to Tipton and go through the McDonald's and turn around and go back. He was all about Guess jeans, and they had to be like perfectly crisp, like straight, so you could fold it here and then, you know, roll it up.
I always enjoy when just the humanity of individuals shines through no matter what the circumstance may be. This individual who had so much to deal with cared so much about the crisp jeans, you know, like that mattered to him because he's a human being.
Right.
And those are the things that make us normal, are just the things we care about outside of whatever our big considerations are. I think that's what's great about coming to community events like this, is you talk about, oh, what are the factor levels and what regimen are you on and what do you do about this, that, but then you just get to know individuals as people.
Right.
And it makes the whole thing so much more normal, which is why I'm curious about the topics that you guys would discuss, because those are the things that really make a human being just a human being. And you mentioned on the phone when we spoke that he and Sam had a very nice relationship, that Ryan really cared for Sam.
They did. Sam loved Ryan and Ryan loved Sam. They played Matchbox cars together on the floor, and Sam embarrassed me many times when people would come to our house for things being filthy and dirt, and Ryan thought it was hilarious, and yeah, they were buds.
Vanessa, before you had Elias, your older son, you had mentioned to me that you had checked in with the treatment center or your treater around 30 weeks. Like, oh, maybe I should check in about this.
When I was a teenager, you know, and I would go up to camp every summer, you know, camp was really, really fun, but it was also really, really hard in the 90s because, you know, you would go up there, you would get really, really close with people, they would get sick, and then they would die. And I remember very clearly of just some kids even getting taken down the mountain. They would go up Monday, and then they would be dead by Friday, and that was like their last wish to kind of be up there. I was really burnt out because I was tired of crying. I was tired of being so sad, and it's a lot for a young girl to kind of go through that. I don't think a lot of young people had to watch these people that they became really close with, you know, just die on you, and you went to a lot of funerals. And so when I went to college, you know, and I was a dancer, and being a dancer, there's not a lot of room for error. Like, you cannot get hurt, you have to push through. I was a little bit in denial, and I didn't want anybody to know, and I would just push through, and if I was having a bleeding episode, I would just ice it and take as much, you know, Tylenol as legally allowed and just kind of push through, and I kind of kept doing that just through my life, and I went through this period of just absolute denial. This is not me, this is not my problem. Like, and so then when I got pregnant, you know, I did a lot of research, and I went out there and I said, okay, how can I do this? And finally, like, my mom was like, you need to call the HTC, you need factor, you know that you will bleed because every time you've had surgery, you bleed really, really bad. And so I did call them, and I think at that point, after that phone call, I was like, okay, let me come back to this. I was finally fully in acceptance.
And I think it's probably clear, but just to be explicit about it, when you'd speak about the campers who'd pass away, it was as a result of the co-infections, either HIV or hepatitis.
Yes.
It wasn't directly as a result of having a bleeding disorder.
No. Yes.
Just important, I think, to make that distinction. And so then after that period where you weren't as involved and you were in college, between then and when you got back in touch with the treatment center, you know, that time in the mid-90s, late 90s into the 2000s, huge transition from one era to another era.
Yes.
Did you feel that right away? Did it take some time to realize just how much things had changed in some regard?
A little bit, only because I kind of watched it through my brother. And so, you know, I do remember when I was pregnant and everything, we were kind of having that conversation. And he was very adamant about not having children because he didn't want to pass this on and this and that. And then I think it was until like my own children were born that he was kind of like, you know what, it's even more different for my nephews than it was for me. I wasn't directly involved in it, but I did get to kind of see like that nice transition. I'm like, you know what, these like folks can be normal now. So.
And did you start getting involved again with the chapter right when Elias was born?
Yeah.
It was just kind of like back into the swing of things?
Yeah.
That was maybe, Jason, your first experience of actually being involved with the community, because meeting in college, you kind of caught Vanessa when she wasn't as involved.
I think within hours of Elias's birth, Jeannie came and saw us, and I was wide-eyed and worried, and what do? I'm a poor graduate student, we don't have any money, where do we get medication, where do we get factor? And there they were to set me at ease and tell me, look, it's gonna be okay. There are resources out there for everyone. And that was a great introduction to this community and to the treatment center. If there's any new dads here today, find me. I'll be happy to talk your ear off about how it's all gonna be a cakewalk.
We were chatting briefly just before this started about, I was telling Jason how we do this around the country, and it's interesting to kind of hear what different regions, different chapters are dealing with. One of the things that I think is really neat in our conversations today, there seems to be a lot with athletics that incorporates people who are not necessarily at professional athlete level. Indiana being a big athletic state. My question for you, Heather, is starting with one athlete in Special Olympics when you got started. Did you find that there was this untapped energy of athletes that wanted to participate but didn't have an opportunity? Did you just provide the structure for that?
There was groups of kids from schools all over who just wanted to be in sports, and there wasn't opportunities for them.
Was it challenging to find the structure to support the growth? Was everyone involved a volunteer?
Yeah, Special Olympics Hamilton County was 100% volunteer driven. So luckily though, there is a Special Olympics Indiana state headquarters who basically has your back.
How long have you been operating?
A year ago today, I met with an attorney and got all the paperwork done. I didn't know we became 501c3 until December, but then it went back to August 8th because that's when we filed the thing. So literally a year ago.
Well, congratulations on the anniversary. Vanessa, you were mentioning earlier, well, we've talked a couple times about your own diagnosis, and one of the things that does seem to be a national trend is the rising awareness of women that actually are affected by hemophilia. You were telling me a story about some of the challenge of being a woman with hemophilia and not necessarily being able for clinical trials or certain programs. Can you talk a little bit about when you first started getting involved as a young community member with hemophilia as a woman?
You know, when I first started kind of getting more involved was right when I was diagnosed. I was, I think I was like 12 or 14 years old. I went in and got my tonsils out and I didn't stop bleeding, and it was very traumatic. And so it's not just my brother, you know, anymore, like, hey, I've got the problem too. Like,
I'm in the club.
I'm in the club. He doesn't, you know, get all the special treatment on all the, you know.
Can I add one really important detail of that story she left out?
Of course.
The doctors told her she can't have hemophilia. She's a girl. She can't have this problem. Only boys can get it. I think that particular doctor, or maybe the medical establishment as a whole at that time, didn't really recognize the possibility of women having hemophilia.
We are a rare disease population, and you're doing so much community building. When people ask, what's the value of what you do? You're not a medical professional. What's the value of community building? We shouldn't need things like what transpired in the 80s to happen in order to bond us so that we become our own best advocates. We are too small a population to afford not to be strong, united, and make our voice heard.
So here's an interesting story. So when I was delivering Emmett, we had this whole protocol in place, which was, you know, here's the cord blood kit, and then Mom, I get factor, you know, at delivery. And I'm like sitting, and Emmett's coming through, and I'm like, somebody give me factor, please do it. And my doctor didn't come down, who knew the protocol. So these two residents come walking in to catch Emmett because he came so quickly. And one of the residents was like, no, she doesn't need factor. She's a girl. She can't hemophilia. My like advocacy thing, I mean, I'm mid-push. I'm like, what? No. And I had very stern talking to her like talking about this, ended up mixing my own factor because she wouldn't give the order, and so I was like, fine. So I mixed it, put it together.
While you're in labor.
While I'm in labor, and, you know, handed the nurse the syringe. I'm like, if you won't push it, I will. Because I'm like, I know he didn't give the order. And so then finally, like, then the other resident was like, go ahead and push it. And so then they did, and then he came out and everything, you know, kind of went forward from there. But then afterwards, I had a very intelligible conversation with that resident because I said, look, like this is what this is. And like, and if you don't, and then I was like, I'm going to give you some literature about it. Let me, you know, kind of move forward and explain. And I had to do some education for her.
Well, and that's so great that you took the step after the crisis to do that, because hopefully that is what helps pave the way for the next people that come through that resident's life, whether they have hemophilia or not, but just more of a sensitivity to a patient's needs, especially as they're in labor.
Mixing your own factor.
Might be a good time to step in and help out. I'm preoccupied. I'm giving birth. Would you mind mixing the factor for me?
No, I totally did it myself. It was one of those like hilarious moments in my own head that I go back and I laugh. I'm like, you know, you're a hemo mom when ... You mixed your own factor while in labor.
How has the role of advocacy impacted Sam's life and your life?
When you have a disability, one of the things you have to do for the person with the disability is get guardianship, and even teaching kids with disabilities, parents, you know, there's so much as a teacher you can do for a family, and then there's things that you can't, and that's the part I don't like about teaching. Everybody that has anything going on needs an advocate.
How have you coped with the inabilities that are a part of the role you have?
Sure. I've taught for 17 years now, and I'm at that point where I feel like there's something more than I need to be doing. Sam's Wish obviously helps with that. Special Olympics helped with that. I would love, and it's a dream, and maybe I'll come back as an angel one day and be able to live the dream. I don't know, but I would love to be able to, run a not-for-profit or do Sam's Wish and not have to teach. I've been told many times that I'm too nice of a teacher. I'm too compassionate, and that makes me sad, because nobody should ever be told they're too compassionate. Ryan was the person who taught me to live each day like it might be your last, and to make a difference every moment that you're given on this earth. And so I'm trying to teach my kids the same thing.
All right, so stole a little of my thunder, because my last question was to that exact point that you shared with me of Ryan's mentality of living each day as though it were your last. So along those lines, between this year's annual meeting and next year's annual meeting, what's one thing that you would like to see happen, or that you could affect a change within this community?
I think the one thing is for us to continue to connect. I mean, it's really great that we get together once a year and we see each other's faces, but to get through those day-to-day management things where sometimes you just need another mom's shoulder to just bounce off of and listen, just to continue to connect kind of throughout the year, because we all are going through a lot of the same process, or we've already been through the process once for a lot of the older veteran moms. We have each other, and we just need to continue to use that to move forward.
During the year, I think we have a Dads in Action group that gets together quarterly. You can form your own community. You don't have to wait for the annual meeting. Have your hemophilia friends on social media, on Facebook, whatever. Exchange phone numbers today and say, hey, when something happens this year and I have a problem at my kid's school in the 504 plan, or I have a question about him playing soccer and head bleeds, can I call you because you've got a kid 5 years older than mine? I mean, make your connections today, build your network, and it's not just this is not a once a year community. Every day we have these issues, and it's great to have others who have shared our experience, who we can bounce ideas around. So I would say that's something all of us can do today to look forward to next year. And in the meantime, next year, next Tuesday, next month, for example.
Yeah, just to spin off that, when we were in Florida doing one of these events a few weeks ago, there was an 18 or 19-year-old girl who was affected by factor V deficiency, which is quite rare. And so she had asked, she has never met anyone with factor V deficiency, and she had questions about, how do I find them? And so we shared some ideas, and I happened to know someone who has it that I connected her with, and she has since started a little thing online. I think Mission 5 is what she's titling it, cool. Trying to organize the different people with factor V around the world online so that they can digitally connect, and to your point, not just wait for the big annual meeting or the big to-do, but just on a more day-to-day basis, be there and be ready so that if something does come up, you know where your little sub-community, so to speak, is. What about for you, Heather, between now, I mean, you mentioned Sam's Wish. I'm gonna steal that one away from you. In an ideal dream world, that would be something that could be your full-time focus, at least professionally. So sure. Beyond that, what's something that you would like to see happen?
I mean, I agree with you as far as connections are made. We all get stuck in our own life. Everybody has ups and downs, and I would just like to see people find somebody that may be struggling more than you, because no matter how hard our life is, there's always somebody else who is dealing with much more. I'm a big believer in connecting with people that aren't as fortunate as you and doing something for them.
Thank you again to Vanessa, Jason, and Heather for participating in Powering Through. And thanks as well to the board and leadership at Hemophilia of Indiana for hosting our panel. I'll be right back with smart people saying smart things after this final word from our sponsor.
NCHS believes in being a proactive partner in their patients' care, which means providing services like arranging convenient and discreet delivery, encouraging adherence to therapies, and monitoring your therapy outcomes. They also provide reimbursement services to help with navigating insurance requirements, which can be overwhelming for families affected by bleeding disorders or chronic disease. With a pharmacist available 24/7, NCHS can offer comfort to patients that someone will always be there when needed. Check out their website to learn more, nchswecare.com, or call 877-626-6247. Again, that's 877-626-6247.
Today's smart person is Maya Angelou, an American poet, memoirist, and civil rights activist, best known for her memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Here's one of many smart things Maya said. We may encounter many defeats, but we must not be defeated. And that will do it for this episode of the Powering Through podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back next month with another episode featuring another great conversation. Remember to subscribe to the Powering Through podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever it is you listen to podcasts. You can also stream our podcast episodes, watch videos of our conversations, and learn about upcoming Powering Through events by visiting poweringthrough.org. Many thanks to NCHS for sponsoring the Powering Through podcast. Learn more about NCHS and their services by visiting nchswecare.com, where you'll also find links to their Facebook and Twitter accounts. And you can learn more about all of BloodStream Media's podcasts for the bleeding disorders community by visiting bloodstreammedia.com. This episode of the Powering Through podcast was written by Heather Robb and Patrick James Lynch, produced and distributed by Patrick James Lynch, Joshua Sterling Bragg, Rob Bradford, Colby Crow, and Avra Friedman. Artwork created by Ryan Geelan and Katie Wright-Mead, and the Powering Through podcast is edited by Allison Stoney. My name is Heather Robb, and until next time, take self-care of yourself.
To watch video from any of our previous Powering Through sessions, visit poweringthrough.org, or to learn more about National Cornerstone Healthcare Services, NCHS, visit nchswecare.com.